And I mean, let's dive in on that issue of, how to interact and what it means to almost acclimatize into a workplace. There's always going to be a unique culture. There's going to be existing relationships. There's going to be established ways of doing things. Now, I know that in the last couple of years, for example, at the bank where I work, we've even hired people completely online through Teams interviews, and in many cases they've started working and they've never come into the office, partly because they haven't needed to, or partly because that team's been allowed to organize themselves around a hybrid way of working. And hopefully we do have a lot more people coming back into the office. So whether you are able to have a chat at the canteen and pick up the vibe and the culture of the organization, or whether you are more reliant on digital connections with people, let's talk about the importance and the ways of approaching integrating yourself into the culture of a new employer. And what are those practical things, Tracy, that people can do to get ready for that? Whether it's researching the company, whether it's speaking to existing employees, watching a couple of our webinars, getting in touch with you. I've shared your website on the chat, etc. But let's talk about that interaction that you mentioned and the sort of acclimatization that you'll need to achieve in order to be successful in your chosen career.
I think the first thing to remember is, like I said earlier, you're not alone. And the second thing to remember is it's okay to ask. So coming in, a lot of the time as students or graduates, people aren't sure, they know they've been picked for this job and they're all excited and they're not sure if they're going to ask questions that are going to be seen as stupid, etc. My encouragement to you guys is communicate. So you can start, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. You can start if you can get any means of job shadowing or engaging with the people that you're going to be working for before you start. That is so valuable. And often when people are hiring you, they would feel really chuffed to hear you say, okay, could I come in and job shadow one of the graduates in my team just to get a feel for how everything works? They would see that as a really positive thing. The other thing is, it's okay to say to your manager, remember they're a manager because they've chosen to be a leader. They're there to ask the questions. It's okay to soundboard things that you're thinking about off your manager. If you were to say, I am finding that I'm in this team, I don't really know anything. I'm not adding any value. I'm sitting there feeling awkward. How do you think I should handle it? The manager is going to actually be really inspirational to you in showing you different ways in which to handle it. Whether or not, remember, whether they're a good manager or a bad manager, let's hope they're good managers, but they've been in the workplace, they know that team. You're not failing by asking. The other thing is to ask your manager for feedback. So you can say, in that meeting, did you feel like I was contributing enough? Did you think I should ask more questions? These soft skills we talk about in workplace readiness are very, very closely linked with communication. So some of the other things are also, it's the unwritten stuff, or let's say the unsaid stuff. And that can be things such as interacting with peers or colleagues in a workplace, which is very different to how you would act with them at varsity, even though you may be emailing a colleague who was a fellow graduate, shall I say, and you may be inappropriate on the email, you may have even made a joke or whatever it is. You never know if somebody then has a bright idea to it and then forwards it to someone else without looking back at the email, and then you find you've got to do every sort of communication and email and engagement as if you're the professional in the organization, thinking that communication could always find its way into somebody else's hands.
Yeah, Tracy, you reminded me of an article that I wrote a while back called "The Most Important Question You Can Ask Your Boss." And through my own experience, and I think it's something that you've been alluding to, and what you were saying just now, is that we don't know what we don't know. And just because of the levels of work in organizations, that hierarchy gives people a greater perspective on the organization, either through virtue of their responsibilities or the time that they've spent in the organization. And your boss or a coach or a mentor or somebody else more senior in the organization is just going to have that perspective on the culture, on the relationships, on the networks, etc. So use that knowledge, but you have to initiate it. A very good manager might be proactive and reach out and say, I want to help you integrate into the organization. I remember when I worked at Accenture, our first day on the job, we were allocated a more senior person to mentor us and show us the ropes. And it was their responsibility to do that proactively. But I think in many organizations, you're going to have to take the initiative. You're going to have to ask those questions. And so the article that I wrote and that I'll share in the chat was to ask your boss, what are my blind spots? And I think, what you're alluding to is to say, what is it that I don't automatically